Hey there gamers, welcome back to the Board Game Co channel, and this is a preview of Masters of the Universe Battleground. Hey there gamers, it's Professor Meg here, and welcome back to the Board Game Co channel. Today we have a preview of Masters of the Universe Battleground. Now this video is brought to you by Orko Studios, and this is a sponsored preview. This is a current project that is on GameFound, and you can check out the link down below right now, and I highly suggest that you do so, because this is a miniatures-based skirmish game where it's all about these different miniatures, and a little disclaimer in a second, but definitely go check out their page because you can see the painted versions and what their final intent is to be, and just how great a lot of these sculpts are, not only for the miniatures, but also for the terrain. Now, for the miniatures, they are build your own, so just know that going into this, that for the miniatures, there's a book that helps you in everything, but they are build your own, so that is just something to know about the game in general. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the world of Masters of the Universe, then you may know these two different teams, but you have the Masters of the Universe and the Evil Warriors. So you're always playing in a head-to-head battle with these two teams fighting against each other, and just know that right here we have kind of a basic setup. This side is very much the basic setup, and this side is a bit what we wanted to do to be able to show you some of the other terrain that comes in an expansion box. This is kind of two things put together. Just know that going forward, that this side is an expansion terrain, and I'll show you the map that it goes on as well in a little bit. But normally in the game, you would be playing a skirmish head-to-head game where you can either play with the standard suggested setup with the people you have seen here in front of you, or you can also use a different point system to build your own team. You would use the point system to build your team, take your fate cards, items, and things like that, and you would basically build your entire army every time you go to sit down and play with this game, which is really the way that it's intended to be played. Now, I did mention checking out the GameFound page. On that, you'll see that there are additional characters that you'll be able to get, so there is a whole lot of characters, a whole lot of expansions, and things that you can add to the game, even fun things like a Castle Grayskull sculpt, really, that is a dice tower. It's very, very cool, so again, highly suggest checking that out. In Masters of the Universe, players are going to be going through 3 different phases, activating their characters, having them move along the board, trying to both capture these flag objectives, as well as attacking the enemy players, and they're going to be doing so using these fate cards to boost their different characters that they're activating and move them along the board. But the first phase that players will start with is the preparation phase. During the preparation phase, players will get to draw up to 5 of their fate cards, discarding any if they should choose, and just know that you also start with 2 of these cards in play in the beginning. These are your glory cards, and they work a little bit differently. We'll get there in a second, but you don't get any additional ones throughout the game. The only ones that you are drawing are going to be the blue fate cards in your turn. So you'll start the turn by drawing from your deck during your preparation phase to give you options for what you want to do. And then as soon as players are ready, you'll move into the activation phase. Players will go back and forth activating their different characters, and once they either choose to pass or are unable to activate anybody else, because you do need fate cards to be able to activate the characters, but you can spend additional ones during your turn. As soon as everyone needs to pass, then the round will end and you'll move toward the cleanup phase. Now, when players choose to activate a character, all of their statistics will come into play depending on the different tests that they need to do, where they're going to be moving, and how much health that they have, but they also have additional abilities that they may be able to use during their turn. Now, when a player wants to activate a specific character, they'll choose a card from their hand to use to activate it, and this will do a few different things. So, for example, if this card is used to activate Skeletor, he would gain 2 action points, but 0 mana. He may already have mana on him. I may not need it for this particular round, but I would not gain any mana from the card, but I would gain the 2 action points, allowing him to do different things around the board. Now, even though this card doesn't give mana in the top part, it does have a bonus that is plus 2 mana. Some cards give you abilities that you are able to do, or forego that for additional mana instead, and mana is something that we'll get into that will be helpful during your turn. Now, once you've done all of this, you'll have your action points available for your character, and you'll choose what you want to do with them. A few of the actions that you'll be able to do are focusing. When you focus a character, you'll put this token on them, and this is something that you'll be able to use to mitigate dice rolls. So when you are rolling the dice, you are making different tests against your different attributes. And when you're rolling these tests, Generally, a 4 or higher is a success. So for example, we rolled a 5 and that would be a success. Additionally, you are able to have exploding dice on 6s, etc. And there are different things such as these focus tokens that can make these easier. For example, if I spent a focus token, I could make it so that my successes would be a 3 and above, and that would make it a lot easier to perform a certain test. Now I rolled a 1, so it's still not helpful, but usually your abilities have you rolling a few more dice for those checks. So in this case, I would be rolling 3. And I would have 2 successes there. Oh, I'm so sorry, Orko. I'm so sorry. I would have 2 there, and with the exploding one, nothing else there. This is because for exploding dice, it has to be a 5 or above to be able to count. You do get to roll additional dice, but it does have to be a bit better for it to be a success for you. And that threshold that you are trying to hit when you are making these tests, such as the 4 and above, is known as the scope that you are trying to hit. So if you're spending a focus to be able to increase the scope, that is what you would be doing. Another thing that you can spend your focus for is to move. When a focus character is performing a move action, they can spend their focus to use a second number of their speed stat. So for example, here on Skeletor, he has a 5 for movement, and then a dash, and then 8. So that means that if he is focused, if he has a focus token, and he's able to spend it, he would be able to move 8 spots instead of the normal 5. Now, movement in this game can be very fun because you are moving along the board, but you're also able to move along a lot of these different terrain elements that are all along the board. I'm hoping that you can kind of see it from this angle, but Orko, he's in such a dangerous spot here. There is a lot of this terrain that you're able to interact with. So for example, here you are actually able to jump over this low obstacle. It would cost you 3 movement points to do so, but you would be able to jump over this. Now you are able to also, for example, where there are platforms over here, you could come from the back and climb up to the top for 3 movement points and then be up above. Or you would be able to climb up the ladder for 2 and then be up there a bit faster. You're also able to move through ladders a bit faster, but again, there's like these little window areas that if you're able to jump through it, you can spend the movement points and go through that little area. So the game can be very fun where you are trying to maneuver around the board, and yes, you are attacking your enemy, but the main thing that you are trying to do is land on these 5 objective tokens. So there are 5 on this board, and your spawn area is over here, meaning that you would need to gain these 3 objective tokens to be able to score them at the end of the game. Obviously, that would mean that you have 2 available to you, and there is 1 in the center that is a free-for-all for whoever is able to get it, and that is one major way to get victory points at the end of the game because it is worth 20 victory points for each token that you have. Now, to be able to win the game, you can either kill everyone on the other team. If everyone's dead, you absolutely win, and that can end the game early. But the game would be played over 4 rounds, and at the end of 4 rounds, whoever has 20 points more than their opponent would win the game. And if you don't have 20 more than your opponent, it's just a draw. Now, this can be a reason why the game is very tactical, that you're not only going for these different tokens, but you're trying to take out your opponent to get victory points for killing them because they'll score you different points for what you're able to do, and you're also able to do these quests on your glory cards. Now they'll have different conditions, such as use a ranged attack to knock out an enemy, and if you're able to do so on the turn that this was played, you would be able to gain 20 victory points for that quest. Now there are some that are easier. This one only grants 10 victory points, so that's why you can see that you need to be 20 points ahead from your opponent for it to be a legitimate win. Alright, now going back to your actions that you'll be spending your action points to do, you will be able to focus, which we went over, and then you'll also be able to move, which is very standard. I described how you're able to move around the different terrain, and then you're also able to attack. Now, when you are attacking, you have to attack with a weapon. You are able to do a fist attack, but it's honestly not really worth it. It's hard and with the amount of damage that it does, but everyone does have a weapon that they are able to attack with. So for a melee attack, you would need to be within melee of the opponent, and you would have to have action points played to them with a fate card and choose to attack with your weapon. Now in doing so, you can see that He-Man here, he's going to attack with his Sword of Power, and his strength is 5. Now the sword doesn't adjust that at all, so that means we are going to roll 5 dice, hoping for at least a 4 or above. So you can see we got a 4, 5, 6, 1, and 3. The 6 meaning we get to roll again. But again, it needs to be a 5 or a 6 to be a success. It is not, so that one is not a success. So we have 3 successes against Skeletor. Now Skeletor would be able to look at his defense, and that would be his toughness ability here, which is a 3. This means that Skeletor is now going to roll 3 dice himself to be able to defend against this damage, and he got 1 6, a 1, and a 3. So let's roll for the exploding 6 and a 1, so he only got 1 defense. Now, this would mean that He-Man has 2 successes, and looking at his weapon, depending on the number of successes, it does a certain amount of damage. So for 1 success, it would be 1 damage, and for 3 successes, it would be 2 damage, but since we only have 2 successes, that would bring us down to the 1 success and do 1 damage. Now, this doesn't stack. You would just do whatever is best for you. For example, if we got 5 successes, it would be a total of 3 damage, not 6, but that is how your abilities will get better, depending on the number of successes that you're able to add to your roll. Now, another action that players are able to do is using an active skill. For example, Skeletor over here has Summon, which costs him action points to be able to summon things. It would cost him 1 action point and 2 mana, but then he would be able to test -2. And for at least 1 success, he can choose an ally within 12 inches and teleport the ally to a hex adjacent to Skeletor. So that's an action that he would be able to do, again, for 1 action point. And that brings us to something interesting, where in this game, it is a tactical skirmish miniatures game, and you will be using rulers to determine certain things. Now, this is just a way to make it a quick way to determine how many hexes away certain things are. I do believe not everything is exactly a hex. Maybe it is. It is exactly a hex. But you can use these to measure how far your different spells and line of sight can affect the different players, because it can really matter when you're shooting all the way across the board. You're able to be within line of sight and within range of your enemies. So these are kind of fun that you'll be able to use them throughout the game. Now, the last action players are able to take is Overwatch. Overwatch is something that you're able to do where you are kind of waiting for something to be able to trigger, where you are able to be useful. When you go into Overwatch, you take one of these tokens and you place it with your character, and when that happens, they are waiting for someone to become within range of their weapon or something like that, where they're able to cast a spell and attack the character that comes toward them. Now, this can trigger multiple characters that are in Overwatch, because that could cause someone to move forward, attack, and then an enemy who is in Overwatch move forward and attack them, causing them to trickle in quite a few characters attacking at once. But this can be a really tactical way to hold back and protect your own areas before the other player can come in and get your flags ahead of you. Now, something else to mention is how you are getting the different objectives. To get an objective, you either need to be on the flag token itself or any of the adjacent hexes, but you're only able to get the points for it at the end of the phase if there's no one adjacent to you, and there's also no one adjacent to the objective. So there would need to be someone at least 1 away from the objective and from yourself, and then you would be able to claim it at the end of the phase, which is during the cleanup phase, after all players have used their characters, activated them, spent their fate cards, and passed. Now, as I said, players will be going through 4 rounds, activating their characters back and forth, using their arsenal that they have available to them to hopefully come out on top. Now, there are a lot of things that will affect this, such as melee attacks versus ranged attacks, and then there are also magic attacks, which will cost you mana instead, and things like focusing and overwatching. Now, there are also the abilities that all of the characters have that you're able to use, and as I mentioned, there are quite a few characters that you have available to play with that you can mix and match them in. But another thing that can add quite a bit of complexity to the game is there are buffs and debuffs that will be added to the different characters. So these are things that you're able to do during your turn that will make them better or worse depending on who you're doing them to and why. Now, some of those buffs that you would be doing for your team and your characters are things like quickness, which would increase your speed by 2, letting you be able to maneuver around the board faster and potentially be able to climb the different obstacles that you're able to use. There's also enhancement, and when you have this, the scope of each of their attack tests is increased by 1, meaning that if you normally need a 4 or higher for a success on an attack, they would need a 3 or higher instead, making it quite a bit easier to attack. There's also a protection buff, which does the same thing but for defense, meaning that it's a bit easier to defend yourself when you are rolling the different dice. And there's a fun buff called regeneration. And for this one, while a character has this buff, nothing happens, but when they are attacked and knocked out, they will come back to life and have 1 wound token removed. So that's kind of a way that you can protect your characters, because otherwise, once they are dead in this game, they are dead, and you don't have as many characters on the board as your opponent all of a sudden, and it really comes down to who can take out more characters first. Now, some of the debuffs would be Cripple, which, as you can imagine, makes their movement worse instead. There's also Blinding, which makes the scope of their attacks worse. It decreases their scope for that. There's Knockdown, which decreases the scope for defense in the same way. And there's also Curse. While a character has Curse, there's no effect, but when the debuff is removed, the affected character gains 1 wound token. So this is a way for it to be on them, and it would sit there until it's removed, and it would then give them a wound. Items are also useful in this game. There are trinkets, shields, and armor, where not only do you have your weapon cards, but you also have these items that you can use to help protect you throughout the game. But there are also disposable items that have one-time effects that when you use them, they're gone forever, but can be quite powerful, so you may decide when to use them during the round to either make sure you stay ahead or use them when you are in dire straits to make sure that you can make it out. But as I said, this game is not just a tactical skirmish game where you have these two teams. You have a huge decision space when you are making these teams. There are a lot of options available, and you're able to build your different fate decks, so you have a lot of options for what type of play you enjoy and what works well with what characters you like. So again, I highly suggest checking out the campaign page on GameFound for this, because there's quite a lot planned, but thank you to Archon Studios for sponsoring this video. As a reminder, this is a preview and all of these components are subject to change, but I am Professor Meg, and thank you all for watching this preview. I'll see you next time. Bye.